Welcome to Cruise News, your daily update on everything happening at sea. Visit cruisenews.io to see today's stories and sign up for email alerts. So if you just glance at the official federal crime data of modern cruise ship, well, it appears to be one of the safest cities on Earth.
Right. The numbers look incredibly low, almost impossibly low.
Exactly. But what if those numbers are intentionally filtering out a massive portion of reality? And doing it simply based on the passport sitting in the victim's pockets. Today, we're really pulling back the curtain on the massive, unseen structural forces that actively dictate every single aspect of a cruise.
Yeah, because behind the pristine deck chairs and, the umbrella drinks, this industry is locked in a constant battle. It's a battle with international legal loopholes, the raw power of nature, and coastal cities that are fundamentally rewriting their own waterfront zoning laws.
When you book a ticket and walk up that gangway, you are stepping into a heavily regulated floating municipality. I mean, the illusion is that you are just on vacation.
Right. You're just there for the buffet and the pool. But the reality is that your floating city is bound by centuries-old maritime laws. It's navigating these complex jurisdictional mazes and dealing with the shifting economic priorities of the actual ports it relies on to survive.
It's a masterclass in logistics, honestly. And today's stories highlight exactly what happens when those underlying structures are pushed to the absolute limit. We're starting with the internal structures of that floating city, specifically how safety and jurisdiction operate in international waters.
And this is brought into incredibly sharp focus by a recent and frankly very heavy incident aboard the Celebrity Xcel.
Yeah, it's a tough story. A 36-year-old crew member from Indonesia, Wigowo Putujanu, was arrested by Broward Sheriff's Office deputies at Port Everglades. The charge was sexual battery.
And a Broward County judge has already ordered him held without bond. The details from the arrest report, they paint a deeply disturbing picture of an incident between two crew members. This happened after a work shift during a 7-day Caribbean voyage.
The victim, who does remain publicly unidentified, she reported taking 2 shots of bourbon and then losing memory of the evening, which is just a terrifying situation.
Absolutely terrifying. She later woke up naked in Putujanu's cabin. She discovered marks on her shoulder and back and saw blood in the bathroom before she managed to gather her belongings and report the incident to a supervisor.
And what makes this case undeniable from an investigative standpoint is the evidence. Broward Sheriff's Office Detective Kyle Schnackenberg wasn't just relying on testimony here. He secured the ship's surveillance footage.
Right, which is crucial in these maritime cases. According to the report, the video clearly shows the victim falling to the ground. She appears completely intoxicated.
Unable to walk or stand independently, right?
Exactly. The footage captures Putujanu lifting and supporting her, guiding her toward his cabin while she's literally seen stumbling into the walls. It is a horrific situation that led to an immediate arrest upon the ship's return to Port Everglades.
But here's the structural issue. Despite the severity of the charge, the existence of surveillance footage, and an actual arrest by U.S. law enforcement on U.S. soil, this specific incident is almost certainly never going to appear in the U.S. Department of Transportation's quarterly cruise crime data.
Which just sounds wild to anyone outside the industry. It exposes a massive structural loophole in how the industry is monitored under the Cruise Vessel Security and Safety Act of 2010.
Let's break down the actual nuts and bolts of that 2010 Act, because it requires cruise lines to report certain crimes to U.S. authorities, which then, become part of a public federal database.
Right, the data that journalists and safety advocates look at all the time. But the trigger for that reporting requirement is highly specific. It only applies if the alleged victim or the alleged offender is a United States citizen.
So because neither crew member in the Celebrity Xcel incident is a U.S. citizen, the event essentially just evaporates from the official public record.
Completely vanishes. That jurisdictional filter creates what safety advocates call a highly dangerous blind spot. You have these massive ships operating out of U.S. ports carrying predominantly U.S. passengers, yet the internal safety metrics are heavily skewed.
It's like a floating municipality, where the police blotter is selectively filtered based on the passports of the people involved. Does this jurisdictional maze effectively shield the industry from fully reckoning with crew-on-crew safety issues?
Well, a crime is a crime, but under maritime jurisdiction, the ship is viewed as an extension of the country where it is registered, the flag state, right? The U.S. government negotiated the 2010 Act to protect its own citizens, but in doing so, it created this two-tiered system of visibility.
I want to play devil's advocate for a second here, just looking at this purely from a legal and logistical standpoint.
Hmm.
These ships are flagged in foreign nations. They're sailing in international waters. And in this case, the incident involved two foreign nationals.
Yeah.
Could the cruise lines, or even international maritime lawyers, argue that the U.S. government simply doesn't have the jurisdiction to mandate global recording? Like, why should the U.S. legal system and U.S. taxpayers be responsible for funding the reporting infrastructure for non-citizens in international waters?
It's a fair legal question. The counter-argument, though, centers heavily on the economic reality of the whole operation. These ships use U.S. infrastructure. They depart from Port Everglades.
Right, they rely on our ports to make their money.
Exactly. And they market heavily to U.S. consumers based on a perception of safety. Advocates argue that if you are using an American port as your primary hub of commerce, the public has a right to know the true statistical safety of that workplace.
Because when incidents between international crew members are omitted from the data, the numbers look artificially low.
They do. And if the public and lawmakers believe these floating cities are statistically safer than they actually are, well, the legislative pressure on the industry to improve security protocols and crew welfare diminishes significantly.
It basically gives them a pass. The Celebrity Xcel case is proceeding through the Broward County court system, but its invisibility in the broader federal data is a really stark reminder of how maritime jurisdiction controls the narrative.
And that same rigid framework of maritime law doesn't just dictate what happens inside the ship. It also strictly controls where the ship is allowed to travel outside on the open ocean.
Yes, and sometimes those legal requirements collide violently with unpredictable weather. Which brings us to our second story. We saw exactly that kind of collision with Virgin Voyages Valiant Lady recently.
Yeah, this was quite a trip. The ship was scheduled for a very straightforward 5-night sailing. It departed New York on April 6th, heading straight down to King's Wharf in Bermuda for a tropical getaway and then coming right back.
Sounds perfect, right? But a severe gale warning was issued near Bermuda. The forecast called for sustained winds pushing 40 miles per hour and massive swells reaching up to 19 feet.
19 feet. I mean, to put a 19-foot swell into perspective, that is a wall of water roughly the height of a 2-story building.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you do not want any vessel, let alone a mega ship, trying to tender or dock anywhere near those conditions.
No, absolutely not. Virgin Voyages recognized the danger immediately. They sent a pre-cruise message to passengers before embarkation in New York, stating they were adjusting the itinerary to, keep things safe and comfortable.
But the pivot they made was jarring. I mean, really jarring. Instead of the beaches of Bermuda, the Valiant Lady was rerouted north to St. John, New Brunswick.
Right up into Canada, passengers experienced an immediate and drastic climate shift. They arrived in Canada on April 8th to daytime highs around 37 degrees Fahrenheit.
37 degrees, and nighttime temperatures were dropping sub-freezing. Virgin Voyages did offer compensation to soften the blow, though.
They did. They offered $100 in onboard credit, which Virgin calls sailor loot, per cabin. They also gave full refunds for any pre-booked Bermuda excursions.
And crucially, an option for passengers to cancel entirely for future cruise credit before they even set sail, right?
Yes, which is a smart move. But imagine the whiplash of packing your suitcase for this. You've got swim trunks, sunscreen, maybe a light linen shirt, and suddenly you are dropped into a winter ski lodge environment.
Naturally, the reaction online was deeply polarized. Some passengers really embraced the unexpected Canadian adventure, getting out and seeing the town.
While others were incredibly frustrated by the freezing temperatures and felt that $100 in onboard credit didn't really bridge the gap for a ruined beach vacation.
But the real question here is the mechanics of the reroute. Why St. John? If the Atlantic is churning near Bermuda, why not just sail further south to the Bahamas, or simply stay at sea for 5 days and avoid the ice altogether?
That is exactly where the invisible hand of maritime law forces the issue. In their communication to guests, Virgin Voyages explicitly noted that regulations mandate a foreign port of call for this specific voyage.
So they couldn't just float around in the ocean.
No. This is rooted in laws designed to protect domestic shipping and ferry industries from foreign competition. Because the Valiant Lady is a foreign-flagged vessel operating a closed-loop cruise originating from a U.S. port, it is legally prohibited from just sailing around and returning.
Or even only visiting other U.S. coastal cities, like going down to Florida or something. So it's not a creative itinerary suggestion. It is a rigid, non-negotiable legal box that absolutely must be checked.
Exactly. If they return to New York without touching foreign soil, the cruise line faces massive punitive fines per passenger. It's not an option.
The safety aspect of avoiding a 19-foot swell is obviously paramount, but the choice of destination was entirely driven by geographical necessity and regulatory compliance then.
100%. With Bermuda completely unsafe and only 5 nights to work with from a New York departure, St. John, Canada was virtually the only legally compliant, reachable foreign port on the map.
Which brings up a tough question about the passenger experience. When cruise lines cite a safe and comfortable alternative in these scenarios, are they genuinely prioritizing the guest's vacation experience? Or are they just scrambling to satisfy a strict maritime statute and hoping some onboard credit pacifies a ship full of freezing people?
It is a really precarious balancing act. The cruise line's primary legal obligation is safety. Their secondary legal obligation is compliance with maritime law. The passenger's comfort, unfortunately, falls to third place when nature forces their hand like this.
Yeah, I mean, they cannot just invent a warm foreign port within a 2-day sail of New York. It geographically doesn't exist.
Right. But what shouldn't be overlooked in this whole scramble is the absolute logistical marvel pulled off by Port St. John.
Yes, Natalie Allaby, the director of cruise excellence at Port St. John, highlighted just how massive of a lift this was. They mobilized their entire operation on incredibly short notice.
To understand the scale of that, you have to realize their typical cruise season is entirely dormant in early April. The very first ship of their 2026 season, the Carnival Venezia, wasn't supposed to arrive until June 20th.
So they were forced to wake up their entire tourism ecosystem more than 2 months early, which is wild.
It's a huge undertaking. Opening a dormant cruise terminal isn't just about, unlocking the front door and turning on the lights.
No, you have to immediately coordinate local security, port authorities, customs, and border patrol officers.
Right, and the longshoremen to handle the heavy lines when the ship actually docks. Plus, all the local businesses and tour operators who suddenly have roughly 2,000 unexpected tourists stepping into their city in the middle of April.
It's amazing they pulled it off. Port St. John opened the Diamond Jubilee Cruise Terminal and maintained the structure of the 5-night trip. They offered guests a full day ashore and late evening time in the city.
It really is a testament to how agile modern ports have to be in an era where extreme weather disruptions are becoming increasingly common. Interestingly enough, the Valiant Lady is actually scheduled to return to St. John later in the year for a planned fall foliage sailing.
Where presumably the passengers will have actually packed the correct jackets this time.
We can hope.
But this brings us to another massive structural shift in the industry. Weather and maritime law dictate where ships must go in an emergency, sure. But the physical infrastructure and urban planning of coastal cities are actively dictating where megaships are even allowed to go anymore.
Right. We are witnessing a profound reevaluation of waterfront real estate across the country. And again, the Valiant Lady finds herself right at the center of the story here.
Yes, she's been busy. During a repositioning cruise from San Juan up to New York, the ship made a stop in Charleston, South Carolina on April 3rd.
And this wasn't just a regular stop. At 110,000 gross tons and roughly 912 feet long, the Valiant Lady officially set a record as the largest cruise ship by gross tonnage to ever dock at Charleston's Union Pier.
Let's break down that measurement for a second, because gross tonnage can be a bit confusing if you aren't familiar with maritime terms. It isn't a measurement of how much the ship weighs if you, put it on a giant scale.
No, it has nothing to do with weight. It is a measurement of internal volume, essentially the amount of enclosed space within the ship.
Think of it like a balloon. Gross tonnage measures the amount of air inside the balloon, not the weight of the rubber itself. The Valiant Lady takes up a massive amount of physical space for its 2,770 passengers and 11,160 crew members.
And the contrast with Charleston's history is really important context here. For 14 years, Charleston served as a home port for Carnival Cruise Line. The Carnival Sunshine was a regular fixture there.
Now, the Carnival Sunshine was actually smaller in physical volume, around 104,000 gross tons compared to Valiant Lady's 110,000, but it was designed with higher density.
Right, it routinely carried over 3,000 passengers. So while Carnival packed more people onto a slightly smaller footprint, the Valiant Lady still holds the record for the largest physical structure to tie up at that pier.
The ship even displayed "I Heart Charleston" using its balcony lighting while docked, which, makes for a great photo opportunity for the city.
It does, but the underlying reality is that this record-breaking visit is actually a symptom of the cruise industry being actively pushed out of the Charleston market.
Yeah. Carnival's 14-year run in the city is completely over. Their agreement with the South Carolina Ports Authority ended at the start of 2025. The Carnival Sunshine made its final home port departures and repositioned up to Norfolk, Virginia.
And when a major player like Carnival leaves a city, you would normally expect the local government to scramble for a replacement, right? Just to maintain that economic engine.
Sure, usually they want the revenue.
Hmm.
And there were initial discussions to relocate the cruise terminal operations across the water to Mount Pleasant, specifically around the Patriots Point area.
But Mount Pleasant officials definitively rejected those proposals. The alternative basically died on arrival.
Which leaves all the focus back on Union Pier. But Charleston isn't looking to modernize Union Pier to attract more megaships like Valiant Lady. They are actually looking to tear the infrastructure down.
Exactly. The city is preparing for a massive transition. They're aiming to redevelop the site into a public-facing waterfront space by 2027.
We are talking about replacing a cruise terminal with local housing, local businesses, public parks, and community access to the water.
Charleston is fundamentally redefining its relationship with the ocean. It is abandoning the concept of being an operational home port.
And a home port requires deep, complex infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
It's not just a dock.
No, it means thousands of passengers flying into the local airport. It means booking hotel rooms the night before, straining the local traffic grid, and requiring massive parking facilities while those people are at sea for a week.
So moving forward, Charleston is strictly positioning itself as an occasional showcase port of call. Ships like the Valiant Lady or others like the Seven Seas Grandeur will merely be passing through.
They'll drop guests off at 8 a.m. for a day of foot traffic and souvenir shopping, and then pull up the gangway by 5 p.m. The deep, heavy footprint of home port operations is being actively erased there.
But this raises a really critical question about the future trajectory of the entire industry. Ships are only getting larger. They require deeper dredging, wider turning basins, and massive logistical support.
They do.
If historic, highly desirable coastal cities like Charleston are actively reclaiming their prime terminal real estate for public parks and housing, where exactly is this industry going to park these floating behemoths in the future?
It is the defining tension of the modern cruise era. You have naval architects designing 110,000-ton and sometimes even 250,000-ton engineering marvels.
Like the Icon-class ships.
Exactly. But the software of the destination, the local zoning laws, the city councils, the residents, they're pushing back. Coastal cities are running a totally new economic calculus right now.
They are asking whether dedicating acres of prime waterfront real estate to serve as a parking lot for a foreign-flagged megaship actually serves the local community better than mixed-use development and affordable housing.
And in Charleston, the community looked at the data, looked at the waterfront, and decided the ships had to go.
It's a fascinating collision of forces. You have billions of dollars invested in the hardware of these ships, but they remain entirely dependent on the permission of local municipalities just to function.
Right, and if we pull all of these threads together, it leaves us with a really provocative final thought about the reality of taking a cruise today.
Which is?
Well, the modern voyage is a highly orchestrated illusion of total relaxation. As a passenger, your focus is on the seamless buffet, the ocean view, the evening entertainment. You just want to unplug.
Of course, that's what you're paying for.
But to maintain that pristine illusion, the industry is constantly wrestling with these heavy, invisible titans. They're navigating international legal loopholes that govern shipboard accountability, which obscure safety data based on citizenship.
They are battling 19-foot storm swells that force sudden, freezing reroutes just to satisfy rigid maritime statutes protecting domestic shipping.
And they are facing down historic coastal cities that are actively rewriting their local zoning laws to reclaim the waterfront and push megaships away.
So as the ships continue to get larger and both global regulations and local pushback get tighter, you really have to wonder how the very definition of a cruise itinerary will be forced to evolve over the next decade just to survive the weight of these intersecting forces.
It's definitely something to watch closely as the industry adapts.
Thanks for listening to Cruise News. Visit cruisenews.io to catch up on the latest updates and sign up for free email alerts.